I'm Bethany Teachman. I'm a clinical psychologist at the University of Virginia, and we're going to be talking about disseminating evidence-based treatments and some of the challenges that we face in doing that. We have an impressive evidence base that can help us treat many problems. And yet there's a fundamental problem that we face as a field that we need to be, I think, more honest about than we have been. And that is that we are failing to dramatically reduce the global suffering due to mental illness in a tangible way. One of the challenges we face is that the prevalence rates for mental illness are absolutely staggering. So depending on the study you look at, approximately 25% of people in the United States will meet diagnostic criteria for a mental illness. The rates go up to 50% if you look at lifetime prevalence rates. In other words, the entire half of this room, exactly you guys, are likely to have an experience with mental illness at some point in their lifetime. And yet we're not meeting that treatment need. We are not even coming close to meeting that treatment need. So in general, in the United States, about 1 in 3 individuals who suffers with a mental illness will actually get treatment for that mental illness. And that's the good scenario. When you start to look at different minority populations, the rates are even more dismal. So approximately 80% of people who are Hispanic or African American who are struggling with a mental illness will not receive care for that mental illness. And that's an enormous problem for many reasons. Clearly, the level of psychological suffering is not okay, but we also see incredible costs to society, both financially in terms of disability, lost work, people not meeting their potential. Looking, for example, at the anxiety disorders alone, the healthcare costs were $42 billion annually. Annually. Substance abuse, the rates are closer to $500 billion a year in costs associated with substance abuse. So we have an enormous problem. And so we have to ask ourselves, why is it so difficult to disseminate evidence-based treatments and really have an impact that will reduce psychological suffering? Alan Kasdan, you may have seen in the press recently, he's been getting a lot of attention for an article he wrote recently that was featured in Time magazine. And what he concluded, and really is the bottom line of the discussion so far today, is that an individual treatment model is never going to be sufficient to address the global burden of mental illness. We need to expand the portfolio of what we do. It's not going to work to have our primary method of reducing suffering be that we sit in our office and wait for people to come to us one by one at a time. That's not going to ever be enough to really address the problems that we face. And there's really promising, exciting work going on using technology, for example, treatments that are effective, that are delivered over the internet. People are getting applications on their Palm Pilots. We can use media. For many people, it is critical that we have good, individually based treatments available. That's always going to be a big part of our mission. But it's not going to be enough. We need to make sure that we can provide for other people in the population more generally. And if we want to reach 25% of the population in a given year, we're going to have to change how we do it. And now I'll turn it over to Carolyn to talk about prevention.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually talk about sort of focused prevention efforts versus the more general community public health-based prevention efforts that Emily's going to be talking about. Prevention efforts have seriously lagged behind treatment efforts if we look at the general literature and where we are in terms of a scientific base. However, in the last decade, we've really gained some traction, and it's really been amazing to see what has changed in just 1 decade's worth of research. The great news about this is it means we can target prevention efforts to risk factors that we know increase the probability that someone will develop mental illness. Moreover, we now have programs that have actually been shown to not only reduce risk factors, but in some cases actually sort of hit what I sometimes refer to as the holy grail of prevention, namely that we have studies showing that onset of the disorder was lower in the intervention group than in a control condition. So, for example, in 2008, again, gives you a sense of just how recent some of these findings are, Eric Stice from Oregon Research Institute found that a cognitive dissonance-based program for the prevention of eating disorders reduced onset of eating disorders from 15% in an assessment-only group down to 6%. Until very recently, we had nothing in the area of eating disorders. So in some cases, people feel tremendous pressure to try and prevent mental illness for all the reasons Bethany described, but we don't have anything to offer them. And that's pretty discouraging, but I think we need to get better about being honest about that. Another problem that we have is if programs are to be implemented by highly trained providers, for example, like psychologists, typically there are not enough of them available in prevention settings. Psychologists are expensive, and many community settings or prevention settings simply don't have enough of them. If the programs are to be implemented by people with less specialized treatment, then they often don't know how to tailor programs adequately to their setting. We similarly don't know how to train many of those people. We also have no infrastructure for training those people. New models need to be developed across the board. In terms of solutions, I believe that one critical solution is going to be engaging in more community participatory research. I also think another critical solution is that we need to spend less time in the academy and get out and get known by relevant activists. The more time that I spend with activists, the more access I have to providing them critical information that they don't know, the more chance we have to talk about these problems and really work as a team in trying to reach the goals that we all have in hopefully a more effective manner. So we need to get creative in creating new partnerships that will access new resources. These new partnerships give us access to new resources. I think the other critical thing is that we can't look at these people as piggy banks, though. New partnerships don't just bring money, they bring new sets of information. They have new sets of skills. And so really going back to that notion of community participatory research, we really need to work with them, respect their knowledge, and really work as a community towards addressing these problems.
So my name is Emily Ozer, and I'm faculty at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. Specific treatments are absolutely necessary for those who've already developed disorders, but I think we also need to think about how do we promote mental health from the outset? How do we create settings for child development and for human development across the lifespan that embed mental health promotion in people's everyday lives? So from a public health perspective, we're talking about the mental health equivalent of clean drinking water or immunizations. What are the basic conditions that we know promote the kinds of competencies and assets that will promote mental health? Most of the public schools that I work in are so pressed to try to improve their test scores that they're very reluctant to give up class time to deal with social emotional learning or to help sort of do specific kinds of programs that might help students manage their behavior and manage their emotions. Now, we can certainly make a case that learning to manage behavior and emotions would help learning and ultimately help on testing, but they're very much under the gun in the short term. And the big idea here is to try to set up the kind of positive circles rather than vicious circles that result in a positive developmental cascade over time. So in Seattle Public Schools, Hawkins and Catalano and colleagues train teachers to use more positive discipline strategies in their class, to use clearer instruction, and also to break children up into small cooperative learning groups so they weren't tracked, but the kids who were faster in that area were working with kids and helping other kids. They also provided social skills training and communication training for parents and students. And when they did the long-term follow-up, what they found 6 years after the program had ended was that the students who'd been in the experimental group had lower drug use, lower sex risk behavior, less delinquency, et cetera. And this trend followed up at age 21 and looking at employment outcomes in other areas. So it's a nice example of working on trying to really increase students' engagement and bonding to school and looking at positive developmental effects later. Yet here in the U.S., I think we're at great risk because of the huge cuts that are happening to education and public health and basic sectors. I should mention, as Carolyn and as both of you already did, that there's a lot of excitement about the role of new technologies to make these human connections more efficient and cheaper so that maybe we can connect via text or cell phone rather than having an in-person nurse or therapist or teacher. And it really remains to be seen if these technologies can provide a strong enough dose of human connection to fit the bill, really kind of understanding what's happening in these interactions. And will getting a text be sufficient as opposed to having someone in your home where you can actually form that connection and what people are able to see by being in person. I think It's clear that psychologists and other mental health specialists need to engage in partnership with local experts, particularly the clients and communities we serve, because we know that as we scale up or disseminate evidence-based practices, whatever they are, that they often need to be adjusted to be most relevant for the people in those settings, and we need their expertise to make that happen. Importantly, I think we really need to enlist the expertise of other disciplines so we can understand the kind of systems changes that we need to study and promote, and understand how the larger political, social, and cultural processes are affecting the people we work with. We know that mental health is very clearly affected by all kinds of conditions that we wouldn't put under psychology or mental health: the economy, international relations, health, many, many other sectors.